real stories of werewolves, of dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
The Green-Eyed Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm a 73-year-old woman now, and I've seen things that would make most folks question my sanity. But I'm sitting here on my porch this evening, watching the sun drop behind the pine trees behind my house, and I know what I know. He's out there again. The shadows stretch long across the clearing, and that's when he comes. 7 PDVs an inch, maybe more. Muscles ripple under a thick, dark fur that covers him head to toe like God's own winter coat. His shoulders are broad as a lumberjack's, arms thick as fence posts, but he moves silent as morning mist through those trees. The head is what gets you the first time you see him. Pure wolf, or maybe dog, I never could tell the difference proper. Long snout, pointed ears that swivel toward every sound. But the eyes, not the yellow amber you'd expect from a wild thing. They're green, the color of a spring moss after rain, deep and knowing, and so familiar it makes my chest ache. His hands are the strangest part. Not the paws you'd think, but hands with long fingers, each one ending in a claw sharp enough to gut a deer. Hands that could tear a man apart, or gentle a frightened animal. Hands that remember being human. He stands at the edge of the clearing now, just watching me rock in my chair. No menace in him. Not toward me anyway. Never has been. Just that careful attention, like he's making sure that I'm safe, making sure that I'm home where I belong. I don't wave. I learned long ago that sudden movements send him back into the deep woods. So I just sit here, and he stands there, and we have our evening visit, same as we have for 20 years now. Most folks would be terrified. Maybe they should be. But I know who he is, even if I can't quite let myself believe it all the way through. Even if admitting it out loud might crack what's left of my mind wide open. The light fades another degree, and he melts back into the darkness between the trees. Gone until tomorrow, maybe, or next week. His schedule's his own. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story starts 50 years ago, when I was a young wife, and the world still made perfect sense. 1974 was supposed to be the best year of my life. I was 23, married 8 months to Robert, and we had that little house with the blue shutters in the garden I was so proud of. Robert worked construction back then, came home every evening with sawdust in his dark hair, and those green eyes of his, bright with plans for our future. He was the gentlest, yet strongest man I ever knew. He never raised his voice. He never lifted a hand except to help. He had this way of putting his hand on my shoulder when he came up behind me in the kitchen, just resting it there like an anchor. "How's my girl?" he'd always say, and I'd lean back into him and feel like the luckiest woman alive. Robert and his best friend Jake had this tradition from back before we were married. Every September they'd disappear into the Cascade Wilderness for a weekend of hunting and fishing and whatever it is men do when they get away from civilization. I never minded. Gave me time to visit with my sister and catch up on my sewing. "Sure you don't mind me going?" Robert asked that last morning, September 15th. I was packing his supplies. Beef jerky, coffee, that awful canned stew that he loved. His hand found my shoulder, that familiar weight and warmth. "Of course not," I said, though somehow something cold settled in my stomach. "Just promise me you'll be careful." I always had me kiss the top of my head. I watched him load the truck. Sleeping bags, tent, enough food for a week. Jake pulled up hogging his horn like a teenager, and Robert grabbed his duffel bag. "See you Sunday," he called, already jogging toward Jake's truck. Sunday came and went, and then Monday. Tuesday I called Jake's wife. She hadn't heard anything either. Wednesday we called the sheriff. They mounted a proper search. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers from 3 counties. Found their campsite on the 4th day, tent still standing, supplies scattered like they'd left in a hurry. Jake's new rifle was there unfired. No signs of a struggle, the sheriff said. Like they just walked away from their lives and kept walking. 2 weeks later, they called off the active search. Missing, presumed dead was how they put it in the report. Robert had been smart about insurance. More than I knew until the lawyers came calling. Wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of, the agent said, and I hated him for using past tense. But the money came through. Enough that I'd never have to worry about keeping a roof over my head or food on my table. Some folks said I should be grateful. I suppose they were right. But grateful was a hard emotion to find when your whole world had just disappeared into the woods without so much as a goodbye. By spring of 1975, I couldn't stand that house anymore. Every room held Robert's ghost. His coffee cup still in the dish drainer because I couldn't bear to put it away. His work boots by the back door. The indent his head left in his pillow that I'd smooth out every morning, but find again every night. I put the house on the market, and I used half the insurance money to buy a cabin up north, 2 hours from where they'd found the campsite. Real estate agent thought I was crazy. That's awful remote. No neighbors for miles. You sure you want to be all the way out there by yourself? Yeah, I was sure. If Robert was out there somewhere, hurt or lost or worse, I wanted to find him. And if he wasn't, well, at least I could be close to where he'd last been alive. The cabin was nothing fancy. 1-bedroom, stone fireplace, screened porch that looked out over 50 acres of pine and fir. Property backed right up to the national forest land. Thousands of acres of wilderness stretching north toward the Canadian border. Locals were kind enough once they heard my story. Brought me casseroles and invited me to church socials. Pastor Williams made a point of checking on me regular, worried about my spiritual welfare living so far from a Christian fellowship. But I had my mission. Every morning after coffee, I'd pack a lunch and head into the trees. I would call Robert's name until my throat was raw. I left messages tied to branches. I'm looking for you. I'm at the cabin. Figured if he was hurt and hiding, maybe he'd find me. I spent whole days hiking game trails and creek beds, looking for any sign 2 men had passed that way. I found plenty of deer sign, bear scat, old campsites from hunters seasons past. Never found so much as a cigarette butt or a boot print that might have been my husband's. By winter, I'd covered maybe 30 miles square of forest. By the next spring, I'd accepted that if Robert was out there, he didn't want to be found. Or he couldn't be. But I stayed. Something kept me there. Some feeling I couldn't name. Like I was meant to be in that place, waiting for something I couldn't imagine. Second year in the cabin, things started getting peculiar. I had grown comfortable in the woods by then. I knew which trails led where, which creek crossings were safe in spring runoff. The forest felt like home, more than any place I'd lived since childhood. That was when I started noticing I was being protected. First time I was following an old deer trail up toward the lake, but I came face to face with a black bear mother and her cubs. That should have been the end of me. Mama bears don't take chances with strangers. But she just looked at me for a long moment, then turned and herded her babies the other direction. Like something had told her I wasn't a threat worth worrying about. Mountain lion tracks started appearing on the trail behind me, regular as clockwork, but always behind, never ahead. Like something big was following, making sure the big cats knew to keep their distance. And then there were the prints, bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen, and the wrong shape besides. 5 toes like a human hand, but stretched long with claw marks at the tips. Found them in muddy spots along the creek, pressed deep, like whatever had made them was heavy as a horse. I started feeling watched, too. Not necessarily in a scary way, more like having a guardian angel with fur and fangs. I'd be sitting by a stream eating my lunch and the hair on my neck would prickle. I'd turn around to find nothing but trees and shadows, but the feeling of careful attention never left. Local folklore was full of stories about the beast in the woods. Coffee shop in town, hardware store, gas station mentioned that you lived out by the national forest, and someone would lean in close, lower their voice. Thing out there that walked like a man but wasn't. Glimpsed at twilight, gone by full dark. Most folks laughed it off as tourist nonsense, but the old-timers didn't laugh. They'd nod slow and change the subject. The pastor started including me special in his prayers, asking the Lord to protect our sister with the loneliness and the strange fancies that isolation can bring. He meant well, I suppose, but it stung. I wasn't imagining things. Something was out there. Something that meant me no harm. It was the timeline that bothered me most. Stories about the beast started maybe 6 months after Robert and Jake went missing. Same piece of forest. Same stretch of wilderness. I started wondering if there was a connection that I wasn't ready to face. 5 years after Robert disappeared, I saw him clear as day. It was early October. Morning mist still hanging between the trees when I took my usual path down to Willow Creek. I had given up calling Robert's name by then, but I still walked the same routes. Still hoped for some sign he'd pass that way. The creature was drinking from the creek when I rounded the bend. My breath caught in my throat. He was even bigger than the tracks suggested, maybe 8 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. Dark fur covered every inch of him, thick and glossy like a wolf in winter coat. His head was pure canine, long muzzle and pointed ears, but when he lifted it from the water and looked at me, those eyes stopped my heart. They were green as Robert's eyes, exactly that same shade of moss after rain. He didn't run. He didn't threaten. He just watched me in a way that made my knees weak. This wasn't some crazy animal or forest demon like the old-timers whispered about. This was someone I knew, trapped in a shape that shouldn't exist. I asked his name, Robert. It slipped out before I could stop it. His ears pricked forward. He took one careful step toward me, and then one more. Water dripped from his muzzle. Those familiar eyes never left my face. I should have been terrified. I should have run screaming back to the cabin and never set foot in those woods again. But instead, I felt something crack open in my chest. Hope and grief and desperate love all tangled together. Is that really you? He stopped maybe 20 feet away, close enough that I could see the rise and fall of his breathing, close enough to count the claws on those human-shaped hands. He tilted his head the way Robert used to when he was thinking hard about something. And then, suddenly, he melted back into the forest like smoke. I stood by that creek until the sun was high overhead, waiting for him to come back. He didn't, but I knew he was watching from the shadows, making sure I made it home safe. 3 more years passed before he came close enough to touch me. 3 years of glimpses at the edge of my vision, of feeling those green eyes on me during my daily walks. He was always there, always watching, but keeping his distance like a wild thing that remembers being tame. The day it happened, I was feeling particularly low, the anniversary of Robert's disappearance, and I'd spent the morning crying into my coffee cup. I got tired of my own self-pity and headed out for a long walk to clear my head. I was sitting on a fallen log beside the creek, watching the water run over smooth stones, when I heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind me. Heavy footsteps, but careful. My heart beat hard, but I didn't turn around. Somehow I knew if I moved too fast, he'd disappear again. So I sat still and I waited. The footsteps stopped right behind me. I could feel his presence like heat from a campfire. I could hear his breathing, deep and steady. Still I didn't turn. And then, I felt it. A large warm hand settling on my right shoulder, heavy with claws that could have torn me apart, but gentle as a butterfly landing. Exact weight, exact placement Robert had used 1,000 times. That's when I broke apart completely. 50 years of grief and loneliness and desperate hope came crashing down all at once. The woods spun around me, and the last thing I remember was falling sideways off that log. When I woke up, I was on my own couch with my grandmother's quilt tucked up to my chin. Late afternoon sun streamed through the window. No memory of walking home. No idea how I'd gotten there, but I could still feel the warmth of that hand on my shoulder. I searched the house top to bottom, looking for some sign how I'd gotten home. I found muddy paw prints on the front porch, big as dinner plates. Nothing inside was disturbed, nothing out of place except me, safe and cared for, when I should have been unconscious in the woods. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if I was losing my mind, or if the impossible had just become possible. I spent the next 2 weeks walking every trail within 5 miles of that fallen log, calling his name. Robert, please, if that was you, come back. I'm not afraid. But he didn't come. Not where I could see him, anyway. The protection never stopped, though. I still felt those eyes watching over me. I still found tracks in the mud after rain, always leading toward my cabin, never away from it. Bears still avoided my path, and I never once worried about walking alone even deep in the woods. The difference was in my heart. That desperate, clawing need to find him had settled into something calmer. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. He was there. He was watching over me. He remembered who I'd been to him, even if he couldn't be who he'd been to me. Maybe that would be enough. People in town started commenting on how I seemed different. More settled, the pastor said. Like you found some measure of peace with the Lord's plan. I nodded and smiled, and I didn't tell him the Lord's plan apparently included creatures that shouldn't exist. The lady at the post office said I looked 10 years younger. Whatever you're doing up there in those woods, it's agreeing with you. She was right in a way. Knowing Robert was still out there, still caring for me in the only way he could, had lifted a weight that I'd carried for years. I stopped searching the forest with that desperate hunger. I started walking just to walk, to enjoy the silence and the birdsong and the feeling of being home. He was there in the shadows. I could sense him following at a distance, making sure I was safe. But he never came close again. Some questions don't have answers you can live with. Some truths are too big to hold in your mind all at once. I learned to be grateful for mystery, for protection I couldn't explain, for love that had found a way to survive even when everything else was lost. 20 additional years have passed since that day by the creek. I'm an old woman now, and my walking days are mostly behind me, but I do still feel him out there. On nights when the wind howls down from the mountains, I hear footsteps on my porch. Heavy, careful steps that circle the cabin once before disappearing back into the forest. In the morning, there's always fresh firewood stacked by my door, although I never see who brings it. Sometimes, I catch glimpses at the tree line, a shadow too big to be human. Green eyes that reflect the porch light for just a moment before melting back into the darkness. Our new young pastor thinks I'm going wackadoodle. He tells the church ladies to keep an eye on me. They bring casseroles and worry about me living so far from town. I let them fuss. They mean well, and they would never understand the truth anyway. I'm not alone. I haven't been alone in 50 years. My guardian is still out there, still watching over me, still loving me in the only way he can. Some folks might call that a curse. Me, I call it a miracle. And in the end, maybe that's the same thing.
She's our newest $10 member, Lori Smith. A name to remember. Please join me in thanking tonight's executive producer, Lori Smith, for making this episode possible. As our newest top-tier $10 channel member through YouTube, Lori gets to see our secret uncensored members-only Dogman stories. If you'd like to check them out as well, then listen to what our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman has to say. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it,
please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.